16. I thought it was strange that I would be sent to school so soon after landing in Rochester. It was April and there were just 2 months left in the school year. I didn't speak English, and I didn't feel ready. But the caseworkers thought it would be good for me to jump right in. I was supposed to be in 8th grade, as I had finished 7th grade in Rwanda. But in America, I got placed in 6th grade. I had worked so hard on my education, and this felt like a setback. I knew I was being demoted because I didn't speak English, but this made me angry. How would being in a lower grade help me learn English? I didn't think our caseworkers valued the education we had achieved. Adding to my frustration, Alex would get to be in 8th grade, the grade that I was supposed to be in. My first day of school was the worst. I didn't know what to wear because I had always worn uniforms to school back home. My frumpy clothing drive clothes embarrassed me. I wore bleached blue jeans, a generic striped green and white shirt, and white sneakers. I was very skinny, and the jeans were too baggy. The school, John Williams School Number 5, was huge compared with my elementary school in Congo. This one had several floors and indoor bathrooms, several bathrooms on each floor. I wondered why the students needed so many toilets. The bathrooms were clean and filled with kids gabbing and gossiping. Back home in Congo, I avoided using the school bathrooms because they were unsanitary and often lacked toilet paper. Students who were late or who misbehaved in class were responsible for the upkeep of the toilets at school. In my new school, it appeared that there were employees whose sole job was to clean up after the kids. I had so many questions. The halls were chaotic, swarming with chattering, shouting kids. Lockers were always slamming. I saw some boys taunting an overweight girl. Discipline clearly did not rule the day, as it did in schools back home. I couldn't understand the words that anyone around me said. It was the first time I had been in a school where I could not comprehend anything at all. The kids stared at me. They were mostly black and Hispanic. No one said hello to me or smiled. I felt like an alien. I immediately wanted to turn around and go back to my family. In class, my teacher, Miss Wilson, didn't know what to do with me because of the language barrier, and she plunked down some math problems in front of me. Math was familiar to me, so that was one small comfort. Numbers are numbers. Once in a while, the teacher would come and check up on me. She would speak slower and a bit louder than necessary, maybe because she thought it would help me. I sympathized with her. She was trying to do an impossible job. She was not an English as a second language teacher. I was floored by how obnoxious the kids were. There was no chief of class to keep the peace when the teacher left the room. And even when the teacher was present, I could tell the kids were rude. They talked back to her. They smirked and made faces, texting on their phones while she spoke. Kids appeared to think of school as a chore, a bore. I thought of the boys back in Congo who were forced to serve as child soldiers, and the girls who were married off, never given a chance to finish high school. School is a privilege. Another thing I didn't understand, why kids would need their own cell phones. So many kids had phones. I could see why adults might need them, but kids? At lunchtime in the cafeteria, a new minefield, rows and rows of tables and chairs, cliques of friends, trays of weird food. I didn't know what to eat. I grabbed a little carton of milk and some fruits that looked familiar, an orange, a banana. I sat down at a table by myself. I had once loved going to school, and now I just wanted to go home. A boy named Abdul was the only kid to approach me. He was small in stature and seemed quiet, but with a very mischievous air. He spoke to me in French, as kids from Africa generally know some French. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Congo," I said, relieved that someone was talking to me. "I'm from Senegal," he said. "I speak a little French." I can try to help you understand what people are saying. Abdul and I struck up an instant friendship. Ms. Wilson sat me next to him in class. He would quietly tell me what the teacher was talking about during the lessons, doing his best to use French. He would also translate for Ms. Wilson when she needed to communicate something directly to me. Abdul was helpful, but it should not have been his responsibility to make sure I was learning in school. Those first days of school were a perplexing blur, but I remember the feeling clearly. Pure misery. I looked different from the other students with my buzz-cut hair and used clothes, and I wanted desperately to blend in. I wanted long hair. None of the black girls wore their hair short like mine. No one wore their hair in its natural state either. The girls straightened or relaxed their hair, or wore long braids or weaves. Some wore headscarves. I needed long hair. I needed braids. Fortunately, the semester was drawing to a close. In June, I escaped the dreaded school for the summer. I shed my winter coat, mittens, and boots. I hated those boots. In fact, I hated shoes in general. I had spent my childhood wearing flip-flops. My feet felt free. Shoes trap you. You always have to take them off, put them back on, tie the laces. So much effort. I'd much rather be in flip-flops. I was thrilled that summer had come. I was learning a little English from watching TV, especially the cartoons, which were easy to follow. I would listen to the words and watch the facial expressions and reactions to figure out what things meant. I tried to muster some optimism that the next school year would be better. My family left our temporary housing for a house in another inner-city neighborhood, which seemed even rougher and poorer than the first. We had a dilapidated blue home with 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, and creaky stairs. If you walked downstairs at night, you woke up the entire household. It was an immigrant neighborhood, mostly Black and Hispanic. The neighborhood kids threw rocks at us. They called us nasty names, like booty scratcher. They made fun of my short hair, calling me a boy, or claiming I had cancer. I couldn't always understand the insults, but you can tell from people's body language when they were saying something crude. One time, Alex attempted to communicate to a mother that her kids were harassing us and calling us names. To try to explain, he made a rock-throwing motion with his arm. She dismissed him and allowed her kids to keep doing it. Where was our American dream? I began to realize that maybe it didn't matter where you lived in the world. That people are people everywhere. Not so different after all. We were not prepared for the inner city. The caseworkers had taught us how to call 911. And we learned how to write our address on a piece of paper in case we got lost. My family had also been warned not to go out after dark, but we didn't understand why. None of us knew the range of dangers that lurked in a desperate neighborhood. I had thought we would be safe in America. We had a home phone, but no cell phones. We were vulnerable, although we didn't know it. There was a group of older guys who hung out on our street, and they always made a point to talk to me. They would say, "Oh, you're so pretty." I would reply quietly, "Thank you." In my culture, you're not supposed to ignore people who are older than you. You're supposed to speak to them. It felt wrong not to respond, but they put me on edge. I had not forgotten what another man had done to me. Thankfully, these guys never gave me any trouble beyond the catcalling. The neighborhood was plagued with crime, and sometimes the police would come in their cruisers, sirens blasting. The first time I saw the officers, with their guns and uniforms, I thought there must be a war on the way. Back in Congo, police officers and military officers were basically the same, and they came when there was war. They didn't make house calls about fights or loud noises. Eventually, I got used to the police presence in Rochester. I was relieved that we didn't have to flee our home for safety. One bright spot in our neighborhood was a little store run by a Jamaican family, selling clothing, hair accessories, and other items. The Jamaicans were always kind to us. They seemed to understand how to deal with people who weren't American. They didn't mock or shun us. They were relaxed, friendly people, always willing to chat, unlike the Americans in our neighborhood, who seemed more closed off. I liked to tag along with my brothers to the shop and hang out. My parents, meanwhile, were looking for a Christian church, specifically a Free Methodist church, like the one we had attended in Africa. We went to different churches on Sundays to try them out. Even though we couldn't understand what anyone was saying, we wanted to find a church we loved. And then we found the New Hope Church, and our prayers were answered. The first time we went, we were greeted warmly, and we felt right at home. But we were perplexed at how short the service was. In Africa, you go to church on Sunday knowing you're not going to get out until the sun goes down. Nobody makes plans on a Sunday back home. It's all about church, all day. In America, the service was just about an hour and a half long, but I was into it. No all-day church. The service was also surprisingly quiet and mellow. Back home, church is loud. Pastor Linda, a white woman, quickly became one of my favorite people. She was compassionate and kind, and she and my mom became good friends, even though they couldn't communicate well. They seemed to have a deep understanding and respect for each other. Linda began driving us to and from church every Sunday. If my family needed anything, the church members were there to help. Taking my mom shopping or helping us run errands, Linda advised me to stay alert in my neighborhood and to always be sure to tell my mom where I was going. I took her advice, even though it seemed odd. Back in Africa, I didn't tell my mom every time I went somewhere. There, everyone knew everyone on the block. If mom didn't know where I was and needed me for some reason, she could easily find me. All she had to do was step outside and ask around. She would find me in about 5 seconds. My parents were having a difficult time parenting in America because they didn't know the language or the culture. I began asking Linda things I would ordinarily ask them, like about words and phrases I had heard people use. Her kids were grown, and she spent a lot of time with my siblings and me, answering questions, helping us with homework, offering advice. She was a calming voice. My family trusted her. She liked to sing, and she taught me a song called Blessed Be Your Name. It was the first song I learned in English. One day, she and Princess and I were singing it with her in her living room, and I started to cry. There was a refrain in the song that made me think of Deborah. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. What's the matter? Linda asked me. I don't know, I said, but she was so warm-hearted. I decided to confide in her that I missed my little sister. Linda didn't know exactly what had happened to Deborah, but she consoled me, saying, God has a plan, even though you can't see it at the moment. Her guidance and faith were soothing to me. She reminded me of all the wonderful things I loved about church and community. I thought about how being Christian doesn't mean that everything is perfect all the time, or that you don't face any struggles. In that moment, I really thought about what God meant to me personally. I had been angry at him, but I decided to give him another chance. Linda found an African market and tried to help us get the spices and foods we liked. She would do research and bring us different kinds of foods, asking, Do you eat this? One day, she took Adele and me shopping in a mall and let us pick out clothes. I loved the mall. So sleek and flashy, filled with shoppers and treasures. This is awesome, I thought. And the clothes didn't smell. On Sundays after church, Linda sometimes drove us over to her house for a visit. She lived on the bank of a lake, in a beautiful neighborhood with fancy houses and perfect green lawns. I didn't have to be a genius to notice that the white people neighborhood was much nicer than our neighborhood. I didn't understand why our neighborhood felt more dangerous than hers. I wondered if it truly was more dangerous, or if it just felt that way. And if indeed it was more dangerous, what was the reason? One afternoon, Alex took a kayak out on the lake at Linda's house by himself. And so, as usual, I followed his lead. I jumped in my own kayak, thinking if he could sail the lake, so could I. But I had no idea what I was doing. I drifted out too far and couldn't get the kayak turned around. I kept floating farther and farther out. The water out there was too deep for me to swim back, and I started crying. Mom was calling to me from the shore. She was crying too, and I'm sure she was thinking, "We didn't come all this way for you to drown in this lake." Linda sent some people out in a speedboat to pick me up and bring me back ashore. I think it was a sign of things to come.